successful model.
In content about
So,
making
Zita
one
today-
more.
COVID-19 is transforming people's relationship to work, with millions now out of a job, and many more getting used to working in a very different way. The pandemic has been a transformation, and that raises a whole bunch of questions. Do you need as much expensive office space? And do individual workers need to commute into the office every day? The need for workers to gather together in offices shaped almost every aspect of life, and the shift towards remote working could have far-reaching consequences. It could affect gender equality. It could even change how we think about time. So for this episode, with me is Agnieszka Kroskowska, who has supported development programs in Southeast Asia, Africa, South America, and Eastern Europe since 2003. As Gender and Social Equity Coordinator at Helvetas, Agnieszka supports the organization to walk its talk at institutional and country program levels. Thereby, she ensures gender equality and social equity are mainstreamed in policies, strategies, procedures, the working areas, and in the everyday work at Helvetas and in the field. Agnieszka, thank you for being part of Inclusive Plug once again.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
With me is also Elena Hadjipetsova, who has 10 years of business support experience through managing programs and projects, delivering trainings and lecturing, direct consultancy and mentoring. In the last 2 years, she's been active as a startup ecosystem builder, leading the investment readiness programs, pre-acceleration and acceleration programs of the Center for Entrepreneurship and Executive Development in Skopje, or Seed Hub Skopje, facilitating the investments to the startups, at the same time being the manager of the Seed Hub Skopje. Elena, thank you for being part of the episode.
Nice to be here, Sabine.
And with me is also Amar Numanovic, who is a public policy expert and economic development practitioner with experience working with multinational institutions, international organizations, think tanks, academia, and businesses. He is the head of the investment portfolio at the Market Makers project in Bosnia and Herzegovina of the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation. Also, he is a member of the Labor Market Experts Network of the European Center of Expertise. Amar, thank you for joining.
Thank you, Sabine, for your invitation and for having me in this podcast.
The modern office emerged along with the Industrial Revolution, when people migrated to cities in search of work. Factories required everybody to be together so they could take advantage of the powered machinery. That started to bring everybody into the cities, where they could work together and easily walk to the place where they were working. That in turn led to the growth of the offices to manage all those companies. Now, almost 200 years later, despite the rise of the internet, the basic function of the office persists. We made the leap from seeing that people could communicate via electronic means, such as email, shared documents, and so on, without realizing that that didn't mean that everybody had to be in the same place. We've had 20 odd years since the internet and office design is really only starting to reflect the real possibilities of that change. What's your take, Elena? How's the pandemic changing the way we work?
You know, pandemic put the whole working environment in context. Actually, it showed that we are reluctant to change even when we see it before the pandemic. It showed that there are a million possibilities if only you want to look for them. And it showed that we are adaptable as human beings. So this pandemic made me think of pros and cons of working in physical space together with your coworkers. And I found that there are actually pretty much pros for working in the same space. So first of all, being human contact and socialization, being it good or bad, whatever. So because we learn from that experience about ourselves. And in this sense, with the pandemic, we are handicapped from developing in this manner. The other one being belonging and common space, because the physical space give us that feeling of belonging, and then we can use the good manners of people, we can learn, we can develop ourselves. Then it is good to change environments for the mental health, for physical health, and the energy, to change the energy. It is good and productive for a human being. Then from the side of the employers, they can easily assess the well-being of their employees, because the human contact and the physical presence give them much more sense if their employees are feeling good. And of course, to wrap it up, the corporate culture is one thing that is developing while physically present mainly. Not that it is not possible working remotely, but it's much more easier when you are in the same space. On the other hand, cons are, of course, working remotely saves time and money. Time and money means time for our professional, but our private life as well. Money to our employees and our costs for commuting to work and everything that goes with it. So, and the other thing, being increasing efficiency if well organized. That is, if well organized, because sometimes we are put into the time frames when we are at work together with our colleagues, but ourselves, we have to have this skill of time management very well developed. So these cons and pros that I just told you give us a sense that the ideal, let's say, situation is somewhere in between. So the perfect balance should be found. It is inevitable that the working environments and the working practice have changed for life, and it's not coming back. We need to be aware of that. It is that each company individually needs to find their balance, how to communicate to the workers, the employees, how to communicate their well-being, how often they will meet physically, if that is possible, and how to organize their work in this sense. So, for example, in SITHUB Skopje, we have witnessed a couple of changes. Of course, we are providing co-working space, separate offices, and the ocean system setup. And what is interesting, not only in our case, but in general, is that, for example, IT companies and IT industry are living through their increase, having in mind the online services they need to provide. And having that in mind, it is natural that they doubled, tripled even their teams. But the interesting thing is that I have even read the reports about this, that they have remained in their current offices. That is the case with us as well. Why is that? Because they only need usually headquarters and some physical space together when needed, but the team, the good proportion of the team works remotely from home. So they're cutting costs of the offices, they're cutting costs for any other expense that goes together with employees being physically there, etc. And they're hopefully keeping their efficiency this way. For the SITHUB, it is true as well. We have cut costs, of course. We are changing shifts. We don't have that much people in one space at one time. We can make better schedules between the events, and combining it online, and now we're starting with physical presence, so it is much more easier that way. On the other hand, other industries have been prone to slowing down their activities, especially micro and small enterprises. They have refrained to take risks, having in mind that they have limited resources, and now the trend is that I have that feeling that they're more relying on their own resources rather than taking risks and ask for partnerships and more unstable and risky relations with others. So yeah, that would be more or less the sense that I have, an experience that I have from Seed Hub Skopje and working with startups and early stage companies.
The pandemic has rapidly accelerated the use of digital technologies to enable remote work. Amar, what's your take? How are companies changing their HR strategies to allow for remote work?
I think that the whole event and the whole pandemic actually demonstrated to which extent societies are able to cope with situations like this and to be like adaptive and to quickly shift toward new practices. I think this event actually confirmed all assumptions we had in that regard. It is very important to actually understand that it would not be possible without all ICT progress or progress in technologies that we made in the previous years and decades. Also, we now have better internet connection, new ways of new tools for communication. So I think that it also demonstrates to which extent it is important to invest in new technologies, in innovations, and also in, let's say, resilience building initiatives and capacities of societies and economies to deal with different challenges. Just think about the climate change and all issues we will face in the future. So now we have to be able to cope with other challenges that we can or we may face in the future. So that's the first point. I think that the private sector actually played a central role in this transition. And what is important to mention, okay, we can recognize that all ICT technologies are in place, they are good, they are well functioning and efficient. But at the same time, it was mainly, in my opinion, organizational and HR challenge for companies. It was not about technology, it was actually how to use all these technologies to adapt to new practices. And when it comes to this event and let's say March 2020, when the whole pandemic and the crisis started, in market makers, our first, let's say, instinct was to try to think, okay, how can we actually address this issue and how can we support companies and industries to go through this transformation? And after we did our, let's say, homework, we actually decided to invest in 3 BPO companies to support their transition toward new HR and managerial practices. And what is important in that regard, that all these companies had some sort of experience in remote work, but actually nobody had an experience of working working completely in work from home arrangements with many people. Some of these companies had like 500 people who had quickly to move to new arrangements. So it was a real challenge, but also it was an opportunity for companies to expand their pool of talents and to reach out to new potential employees, because now when the whole work is decentralized, now you can reach to rural areas, to smaller cities, to people who are not able actually to travel to bigger cities for work. And now they actually used all these strategies, HR strategies and new models actually to attract and expand their labor market or a workforce pool. What is very important to mention, when I started preparing for this interview, I have contacted actually two BPO companies from Sarajevo, and just to explore what is their, let's say, experience and opinion on all these recent transformations and developments. And I was, to be completely honest, a bit surprised, because what I received as a feedback from them is that they are pretty happy and comfortable with the new setup. So someone said that actually they didn't expect that it will be that easy to go into new like remote work or the hybrid work arrangements, but actually now they can see some positive benefits for them. They can see some sort of positive developments in that regard, and they actually understood that it is much easier to manage than they expected. So I actually tried to identify the main challenges, and actually they said that the onboarding of new employees is one of the main challenges. The second important challenge is that some employees are facing difficulties to work from home because they do not have proper internet connection, proper equipment, or other types of conditions, let's say. And the third important issue is that it influenced the teamwork in a negative way. So people are more individual now. They tend to work separately without interacting in an ad hoc manner. So that is one of the key challenges they are facing. When it comes to the first 2 points, I understood from their responses that they actually adapted. And now when it comes, for example, to the onboarding of new employees, they have senior staff in the office when they have to let's say, welcome new employees and to provide them with the training and all other stuff. The second issue related to equipment, internet connection, they already solved that by investing in let's say, at home workplace of their employees. So they actually manage that as well. But still, the main challenge is how to nurture and foster teamwork in this type of setup, because now we tend just to arrange like very formal meetings. We have really well-planned schedules, and in that circumstances, it is not possible, sorry, to have like more relaxed conversation with your colleagues and to build that culture within the team. So that is the main challenge that is not solved by let's say, all these practices and policies implemented so far. So that will be probably, in my opinion, the main challenge for the future. But it is also very interesting to see to which extent companies now have to introduce, let's say, proactive HR strategies. They cannot like afford to have HR policy and management on autopilot as they mainly had in the previous times. So now they have like to explore needs of their employees. They need to do like research to closely monitor what's going on and how to adapt. So I think it is very important to see that we have like the major HR related changes in this new setup.
Those able to work from home are a privileged minority. Is this the case in North Macedonia, in your country, Elena? Could you elaborate on this?
Well, yeah, in general, low-wage occupations and self-employed especially have fewer opportunities to work from home. As you might know, in Macedonia, we are mainly agricultural country, textile, wine industry. We have we call them developing zones with factories where physical work is done. So with employees, low-wage employees actually, and these occupations, of course, are not able to work remotely. And I have somewhere read reports that it is estimated that nearly 100 million workers in around 35 advanced and emerging countries could be at high risk because they are unable to work their jobs remotely. It means that, I mean, food and accommodation, for example, wholesale and retail trade, are the hardest hit for having the least teleworkable jobs, as they call it. So yes, this will affect them mostly. And as I told you, yes, those occupations with low wages, and imagine we are on the low scale of this wage scale, have fewer opportunities. Let me put this way.
The work from anywhere revolution is having particularly pronounced effect on some groups within the workforce. Women are more likely to work in the face-to-face roles, and so they have been disproportionately affected by the recession caused by the pandemic. What's your take on this, Agnieszka? How will this revolution affect gender equality?
It's a tough one, because indeed we've seen that women all over the world, in developed countries as well as underdeveloped countries, have been disproportionately impacted by this pandemic in terms of job losses, wage losses, insurance losses, et cetera, et cetera. A lot of women have also, been forced to quit their jobs because of the quarantine situations, kids out of school, et cetera, which has placed additional burden on them in terms of the traditional, duty of care of households and families. So we're dealing with, before the pandemic, already significant gender gaps in certain sectors, in certain sort of future of work sectors and statistics. And indeed, now with the pandemic, my impression is, and that's to a certain extent corroborated by studies, is that the advances made in gender equality are now in significant backsliding mode. Be they economic empowerment, be it issues related to gender-based violence, and certainly women in decision-making positions. So from an economic perspective, it's a huge loss to societies all over the world. Never mind, the women themselves as individuals and the families that they're supporting and the communities that they're contributing to. It's very worrying. Also, if you consider, the next generation of young people, of girls who are now out of school, and what that means for them in terms of their future job prospects and employment prospects. We're handicapping an entire current and future generation of women and girls. I think it's quite alarming, actually.
What can be done to make remote work successful for everyone everywhere?
It has to happen on both fronts. There has to be an enabling environment on the home front, an enabling environment on the employment front. And for that, there needs to also be an enabling environment in the legal framework of the countries, and how employment laws, insurance laws, pension schemes are regulated, are decided upon to, one, ensure that the most vulnerable in times of shocks, in times of protracted crisis like a pandemic, are protected, are supported to absorb the shocks and adapt. But then also there's issues of, traditional gender roles and unpaid care work and homework, whereby the work that is carried out primarily and mostly by women still at home is not valued. It's not given a monetary equivalent. And on the other hand, there is a reputational burden and expectation that women fulfill that role. So I think women are very often find themselves, in a position of being between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, loving and enjoying being mothers and wives and taking care of their families, On the other hand, also wanting to contribute economically, but also feel safe and independent economically, wanting to pursue their career choices, be it through self-employment or labor. But I think it's also an issue of then employers and different services being available to women to be able to strike a better balance. So if they have to work from home, you know, what kind of gender equality is promoted at home in terms of sharing tasks, sharing responsibilities, mutual respect, mutual value, but also what kind of enabling environment is supported in the workplace, you know, through, for example, more family-friendly options of flexible work time, of having spaces at the workplace to bring a child if necessary, or having daycare services contributed to or supported at the workplace, so that women aren't always put in this position of having to choose one or the other, but can have options that are informed, that are respectful, of striking a better balance through the employment conditions, but also their conditions at home within their families.
Do you think, Amar, that the global experiment in remote working has shown that there are some things which are hard to foster online, like corporate culture and creativity? Does the office in some form look set to survive the pandemic?
I definitely think it's a tough question, I would say, because it is very hard to comment and to assess ongoing things. It will be easier in 2 to 3 year period to discuss about things when we see what happened actually. But now I think we have some sort of experimental trial and error phase. And now companies, let's say, adopt different models and different practices. And now we need to monitor that closely and to see what will happen, and to actually select the best models from that pool. Sorry. And when it comes to your question, I definitely think that the office will survive in some shape, because I don't think it is possible to make a complete shift from one modality of work to another one. So definitely, I think that the office will be some sort of meeting point in the future, and we need to somehow foster face-to-face collaboration and meetings, because as I previously said, it is obvious that Zoom, MS Teams, and all other platforms cannot replace completely face-to-face conversations and interactions. And many people actually mentioned that they have like trust-related issues, because we are all aware that someone can record our conversation. The another thing is that it is completely different when you meet person in face compared to online conversations. So I think all these issues have to be addressed somehow. And I think that we can see from the market and industries that the majority of companies are actually shifting to this modality, which is called hybrid work arrangement. So we need to find a good balance. But definitely, I think that this pandemic and the whole crisis just speeded up the let's say the trend that was existing before. Just think about digital nomads. Just think about all flexible hours offered by many ICT companies, and all these things that existed actually before this crisis. It is very hard to compete against that. People like to be more free, to be able to better plan their work-life balance, family duties, to be able to travel and to work from remote locations. I don't think it can be reversed. I think that's the obvious future, and the whole pandemic accelerated that. But still, I think we cannot replace some old modalities, face-to-face work, interactions. So we need to find a good balance, definitely. From all conversations I'm following at the moment, I can see like that many questions are related to productivity and innovations. When it comes to the productivity issue, we have two main debates. The first one is related, okay, can we trust our employees that they will spend their time on performing their duties? And I think with all research we have so far, it is evident people actually are reliable, and they actually delivered more working hours than expected. But the second issue is that I read like recently one study that actually indicated that despite the fact that many employees actually have increased the number of hours spent at work, actually now we have the situation where the output is the same compared to the pre-crisis level. So it indicates that productivity is decreasing to some extent. Of course, we have to be careful because many of these studies are not calculating like travel time and all other things into their findings, but still we need to see to which extent people will be exposed to let's say work-life balance disruptions, and that is something that have been recognized by many companies I was talking with. Okay, it is like good to recognize that this creates some opportunities for people, but also it can be tricky because people now spend more time in let's say work-related activities. So productivity issue is something that should be monitored and discussed in the future. But when it comes to the creativity, I was reading like this Steve Jobs biography, and I saw that he was insisting on the architecture of building that can support people to meet each other and to get into interaction, because he was believing that the main source of innovation and creativity are actually random encounters of people. So you meet someone, you exchange some information and data, and then you actually get with some new conclusions, ideas, and things like that. With this, I see that we are losing that momentum. We are losing like these random encounters, and we need to improve somehow that. I'm not completely sure what can be the policy at the moment, but I definitely think that employers need to foster and encourage people to meet each other within the organization, but also within the industry, because I think it is equally important to be in connection with people outside of your organization and to have that exchange. So to try to briefly address and answer your question, definitely office is going to survive. We will probably have some sort of, let's say, hybrid arrangements. But still, at the same time, I think it is crucial to start thinking about ways of improving actually remote work engagement, because people will demand that in the future. It will not change. And I read actually recently in the Wall Street Journal that more and more employees or workforce actually require some sort of flexibility, and it will be a new demand. So we need to start thinking about that and start preparing for that, to see what can be the most efficient and the most effective way of implementing new policies.
It may feel like the pandemic has revolutionized working life, but in some ways has simply come full circle. Before the Industrial Revolution, there was no working week, no 9 to 5 or fixed workplace for many people. And thanks to the virus, this may be closer to the way things will look when the world emerges from the lockdown. Thank you for watching and listening, and stay tuned. This was Sabine at RECONOMY, a program of the Swedish International Development Cooperation Agency implemented by Helvetas in Eastern Europe, South Caucasus, and the Western Balkans.